Okay, everybody, welcome to another edition of RSG Insider. It's our podcast series, and I am Jim Simon, today's host. I am here with my good friend and colleague, Brandon Fender. Brandon is a senior associate with RSG, and today we're going to be talking about commercial real estate. It's obviously a very big field. We tend to do some specialized work within that field. And we're going to be getting into what we do and how we help our clients. So, Brandon, why don't you start and tell us a little about yourself?
Thanks, Jim. Yeah, like you mentioned, Brandon Fender. I'm a senior associate with RSG. We've been working together for over a decade, particularly with public agencies across California. A lot of the different community development efforts that cities and counties are engaged in often rely on a component of commercial real estate. So that's where we come in and we bring our expertise in commercial real estate, whether it's related to housing development or economic development goals. There's a component of that that's related to commercial real estate.
Yeah. And so with that in mind, what are like four of the, three or four trends you're noticing around commercial real estate today that, kind of fall into the space that we're working in right now?
I should say before we get into trends that a lot of the projects that our public agencies are involved in are public-private partnerships. So
Right.
there's a private entity, a private developer typically, and the public agency. We're both trying to work together to accomplish goals for either side. But in terms of trends, we've worked on several different industrial projects in the Inland Empire. So these are big logistics buildings, large developments, large-scale developments, warehouses, logistics. And there's a lot of environmental impacts and then also impacts on the community. And some of these projects are requiring discretionary approvals, and that's where the public-private partnership comes in play. They are asking for discretionary approvals, and that gives the city the opportunity to request community benefits in exchange.
Right. Right. And then in terms of like some of the, what about some of like the economic trends around like industrial? I mean, obviously that's been a market that's been really hot for a while. Particularly about 2 or 3 years ago. It's cooled off a little bit because of just kind of an overproduction of the space, but I think long term it's still expected to be quite strong given the way we shop for goods and services. Can you talk a little bit more about some of the specifics that you've noticed there?
Yeah, exactly. So a lot of the development is driven specifically by the trends in e-commerce, but also the Inland Empire's proximity to the Port of LA and Long Beach. So you have a lot of the e-commerce businesses coming in 2021 and 2022 that drove a lot of growth. We had really low vacancy rates, really high rent growth year over year. Since then, it's kind of cooled off, as you mentioned. Interest rates, as we'll talk about a little bit later, I'm sure, have caused some cooling effect in the market. But long-term, e-commerce looks like a very favorable business class. So that asset type that they're occupying, the logistics and warehouse space, is probably forecasted to do strong in the future as well.
Right. Okay, so that's, warehouse, logistics, that's sort of one. I think life science is another one we're seeing a lot of activity in. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, specifically in the Bay Area. So the peninsula, the Bay Area, even more specifically. We're seeing a lot of life science development. Again, 2021 and 2022 in the Bay Area, those were referred to by some people as the rocket ship years because there was such strong rent growth and really low vacancy rates. Space was being snatched up really quickly. Since then, a lot of office and flex industrial space has been converted to life science space, and that's inferior space to the purpose-built space because the purpose-built space has higher deck heights, it has better amenities, better utilities in the building, so it has everything that the life science tenants are really looking for compared to this sort of second-class space.
Right.
Since 2022, 2023, we've seen a lot of that second tier space come onto the market, and it's affecting vacancy rates. So if you look at the top line vacancy rate today for life science or tech office in the Bay Area, it's really high. It's over 20%. But if you look even deeper into those numbers, that number is specifically related to sublet space, and it's that inferior space that's being leased out that's sitting on the market. The Class A and Class A plus space is still being occupied. And we're still seeing some of that being developed today.
Yeah, and it's funny when you talk about like this kind of sector, right? Because it's really a segment of the office market, and so people think about office buildings and from the outside view, it's a glass building, four walls, but the inside, the quality of the space, the cost of the building is significantly higher, and it's a unique subset of everything else that we kind of look at around that segment of real estate. Um, what about hotels? We'll talk about that a little bit.
Hotels are still trying to find their way, it feels like. In the wake of the pandemic, obviously, there's still a little volatility in the hotel market. It hasn't fully recovered to what it was in 2019, for example. But we are seeing some activity, specifically Los Angeles, Southern California. LA specifically is supporting the development of new hotels through subsidy. They have a number of world events coming up on the calendar. There's always going to be the beaches that are attracting tourism, but the World Cup, we have the Olympics, Paralympics, Super Bowl's coming back to LA. So the city of LA has been working to encourage hotel development and add more rooms to the city in advance of those world events. And they're doing that with subsidy. So it's public-private partnership. The monetary value is going the other way, but it's still a partnership between a private developer and a public agency trying to accomplish mutual goals.
Yeah, and I think a couple of weeks ago, the City Council of LA just announced that they're, a lot of those hotel expansions were really designed around creating more room nights availability to facilitate the expansion and remodel of the LA Convention Center, which has been long overdue. And just last week, they've announced a partnership to proceed ahead on that project, which is, kind of shows the relationship between hotel and a business traveler, at least in that case. And I think the other thing we see, obviously a lot of our work, for those folks that may not know, is out here in California. We are fortunate to have, relatively mild weather. Not recently. If you're watching in early July, like we all are, it's been kind of a heat wave out here. But for the most part, that year-round climate that we have, creates a great demand for hotel space, and long-term prospects are still pretty solid. I think it's some of the markets in the country that were first rebound. I think among them was the city of San Diego and that hotel market, and seeing their occupancy rates get back to much more historically stabilized values. Okay, so we've talked industrial, we've talked hotel. What other uses do we want to get into today?
I mean, multifamily, we can't not
Right.
talk about multifamily when it comes to commercial real estate. In California, supply is really low, demand's really high. We all know that it's one of the state's biggest priorities. We've seen a number of bills passed over the years that are intended to support housing development and to encourage housing development. So we do a lot of work related to multifamily housing and housing in general.
Right.
Fiscal and economic impact analyses. We're doing a lot of policy work with cities and counties on housing development, inclusionary housing, for example. So a number of different ways that we can impact the housing market from a commercial real estate perspective.
Right. And housing's really tough, right? Because we're at a point where it's difficult for people to buy homes, and so a smaller and smaller portion of our population is unfortunately having to become renters or remain renters for a longer period of time that they have in previous generations, and that's been an issue. You've got households that are senior and having difficulty aging in place because there's nowhere else for them to go. We sort of have tax incentives here in California that were aimed to, make housing affordable for seniors, but then it also sort of locks them into a 2,500 square foot, 2-story home that maybe is not suitable for their lifestyle at this point in time. There's some structural things with the economy that all needs to get addressed with really to solve a bigger housing crisis, but that's a big part of it.
And that all sort of gets back to interest rates too, because there's sort of immobility in the market right now that's driven by interest rates. And I think even if we started seeing interest rate drops over time, people are still going to remain in their homes because they're going to anticipate the next drop. They're going to wait
Right.
for that lower rate.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's tie this into like kind of some of the work that we do at RSG. How, I mean, we talked a lot about like the market and, different sectors of real estate. How do we help our clients, would you say, to somebody else around, these types of things? Most of our clients are public agencies. We do work with some private sector developers on entitlement projects more often than not, but for the most part, 90% of our clients are public sector. So how do we help them with real estate? And I think it's kind of a less clear path. So maybe you could talk a little about what that looks like.
Yeah, good question. So with the life science and industrial work that we've been doing, that's been all centered around the developer pursuing discretionary approval from the city. And that gives the city or county an opportunity to seek community benefits. So there's a negotiation that happens. And before we get into that, there's a feasibility analysis and trying to evaluate whether a project has capacity sort of in that value creation process with discretionary approvals, because the discretionary approvals adding value to that land essentially. So the city or county can step in and sort of extract some of that value in the form of community benefits through a development agreement or some other forum like that. So that's one way that we're using commercial real estate to help public agencies.
I mean, there's like hotel projects, right? You mentioned a little bit earlier about working on those where those are subsidies, and we provide that kind of assistance with the city. So they're not just, granting a subsidy to anybody that walks in the door, but trying to figure out what's the right situation for that. So this is like a pretty passionate area for you. I mean, I've known you a long time, and Brandon took a break from RSG to become an entrepreneur. When he was successful, one at that, sold his business and came back to us, fortunately, and has really found his place in real estate. I know you're currently pursuing your real estate license, and on top of that, but I guess there's a lot of people who are interested to know like the people behind the numbers, right? So what is it you would describe as your passion for why real estate? What is it? So what is it that's so interesting to you?
Yeah, exactly. I'm definitely passionate about commercial real estate. I love that there's a huge creativity component to it. Every single site and every development that we look at that a city sees or a county sees is unique, and it requires a level of qualitative and quantitative analysis. So we have to look at it in multiple different ways and interpret things. So really, really enjoyable stuff for me. I'm passionate about that. I love the ability to use my expertise in commercial real estate to help public agencies pursue their objectives and their goals and improve their communities. So that's what really makes me excited about commercial real estate.
Yeah. I mean, it's obvious. I mean, I think for someone who gets to work with you a lot, that when we have a project like something like this, you're like the first to want to lean in and get into the details of it. So, it's a great talent you've got to be able to take the numbers and dive down into the detail, but also kind of appreciate the bigger picture of what you're trying to do. Well, thanks, Brandon, again for joining us today. This is like a nice introduction to a little bit about yourself and what you do at RSG and how we help some of our clients. This is the RSG Insider. It's our podcast series available for you now to check out. We're happy to have Brandon Fender join us today, and we will see you guys next time. Take care.